I'm Kelly Vaughn, and this is Inside Indy. Tonight we're going to be talking about Alzheimer's disease. And I have a relative, I'm not going to say any names, that may be going through that. We're not sure yet. But I had an aunt who suffered from this. And I gave Laura a call, Laura Forbes. She's the communications director for Alzheimer's Association of Greater Indiana chapter. And she's joining us here on Inside Indy. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And you could tell over the phone that though I was calling to do an interview with you for this show, I was really speaking from my heart to say, you know, I'm going through this now. And, you know, I bet there are other people who are going through it too. Can you come on the show and answer our questions? Help us to understand what's happening to our loved ones.
Yeah. And I so appreciate you, reaching out. And I get that a lot, everywhere I go, when people say, oh, what do you do? I say, I work for the Alzheimer's Association. It seems like almost everybody has a story, has a connection, has questions. And so, I'm grateful for the opportunity to spread the word about the disease and the resources that we offer to help.
I appreciate it so much. In fact, when I called the number for the Indiana chapter, and I got a lady who was answering the phone, and I may have even called in after hours, and she was so helpful. And she was going into details and asking me questions, and I just didn't expect that.
Yeah, I believe you reached our 24/7 helpline, and that is probably the number one thing that I would want people to take away, actually, from this interview is that is a resource that is available literally, as the name implies, around the clock, completely free of charge. We like to tell people, if you're lying in bed staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., you don't have to do that. You don't have to wait until 9 a.m. the next business day to get your questions answered. You can call that helpline and you can get immediate support for any question related to Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia.
That's so good to know, so comforting. So let's start off, Laura, by just what is Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, the most common form of dementia. So we talk about, Alzheimer's and other dementia. So dementia is sort of an umbrella term for changes that occur in the brain with memory and cognition that really interfere with people's daily lives.
Okay. So dementia is the umbrella. Alzheimer's is under that umbrella. So are there other things under the umbrella?
There are. So Alzheimer's, as I said, is the most common. The second most common is something called vascular dementia. And that is something that occurs typically after a stroke. It's actually something, I will tell you, I had an experience when I first started at the Alzheimer's Association. I didn't think that I had a personal connection. And then I heard the term vascular dementia, and I was like, oh, that's what happened to my loved one. And again, I won't, name names, but it was like, oh, he had a stroke and then he couldn't remember my name and he had all these memory issues. So there are, other causes of dementia that are, not as well known, but that one is very common as well. And then we also see a lot of mixed dementia. So some people might have vascular dementia as well as Alzheimer's and some other, forms of dementia as well.
Okay. So what are the symptoms, and do we know what causes Alzheimer's disease?
So we'll start with the symptoms. The most common one I think that people think of course, is memory loss. And again, it's that memory loss that really interferes with daily life. So, sometimes people get it confused with just the normal sort of changes that happen with aging. Sure. And that's very common. But, if people are, forgetting recently learned information, that's something to really look out for. I like to give examples, and one that I heard recently that I thought was really powerful is, let's say I, meet you at a barbecue on a Saturday, and then I run into you again at church the next day. If I don't remember you, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I may have met a lot of people at the barbecue, but if I don't remember attending the barbecue, that's not a good sign. Another one that you hear a lot is, if you forget where your keys are, well, we all do that. But if you don't remember what a key does, that's a warning sign. Other things that we hear too is, if people have trouble with really familiar tasks. So we'll hear people say, oh, my grandmother made this cookie recipe, constantly for years from memory, and then she started putting, salt instead of sugar. Or she, went from her home to the grocery store the same route for 30 years, and then she got lost on the way. Those are the kinds of things that we hear that are really red flags.
Okay. So, yeah, because I find myself forgetting things, but like you said, it's not quite like that.
Yeah. And then there are other signs as well. Sometimes changes in mood and personality can be a sign that many people are not aware of. I actually had a caregiver say to me one time, I just thought my dad was being a jerk. I had no idea that could be a sign of Alzheimer's or dementia. So certainly, encourage people to learn more on our website and, learn about all of these warning signs, because, it really is, if something seems really off, if there's just some, change, that can often be a sign. It's just like, this isn't who I,
Okay.
There's something different.
So what is actually happening to the brain that causes that memory loss? And I have heard that it's more initially it's the short-term memory, not your long-term memory.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for
Yeah.
us?
So at a high level, there are changes occurring in the brain. They're called plaques and tangles that are thought to be sort of the cause of that memory loss. But the underlying sort of causes, a lot of people will attribute that solely to genetics. That's one of the sort of myths out there is, again, when I say, oh, I work for the Alzheimer's Association, some people will go, oh, well, I have the gene. And it's much more complicated than that. Certainly genetics plays a role, but there is at least one gene that, it does mean that the person, if they live long enough, will unfortunately develop Alzheimer's, but that is incredibly rare. It's much more common that people will have genes that increase their risk for developing the disease, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will develop it. So that's one piece that we will always try to help people understand.
Okay. So you said plaque and
Yeah, amyloid plaques and tau tangles. So that gets really in the weeds, but that's what's kind of occurring in the brain.
so do we know why that occurs?
Researchers are still understanding, a lot of the why behind it. As I said, we know that, genetics can play a role, but certainly we believe that lifestyle factors also, play a role as well.
Wow, it's really scary. So now one thing I noticed in dealing with someone who has, again, and I want to explain about the short-term memory, what I've experienced personally. So it would be like if I went to the store and I bought a bag of chips, and then they ate the chips, and then they might say 15 minutes later, I want a bag of chips. You just ate a bag of chips.
Right.
And of course, and I don't count myself as a caregiver because the person that I'm speaking of is actually not to that point. She's not requiring a lot of care. But I just noticed we just did that. Or they might call me right back and say, I was just checking on you. You just checked on me. And so but if we were talking about something that happened when we were teenagers, oh man, she's got all the details.
Yes, that forgetting the recently learned information. Sometimes people will have trouble, following a conversation, or they'll ask sort of the same question over and over again. That is a very common sign. Yeah.
So is it that what I've heard is that our memory is in like layers, and in the deeper layers is all the stuff from the past, and the recent stuff is on the surface.
That is it affects people differently, certainly, but generally that is the case. And so sometimes you'll find people actually reverting back to a previous time. So you might have someone who, is in the home that they've lived in, again, for, 30 years, talking about, I want to go home, and they're thinking of their childhood home. Or, they may say like, oh, I need to go to work, even if they've been retired for, a long time. So it's, they start to like revert back eventually, but it is a progressive disease. So it can start with that kind of, recently learned information in those early stages. And then as you go into the middle and late stages, that's where you start to, see people sort of, forgetting further back in time.
Now, you said it is a progressive disease, so typically how long does it take to progress from short term and just kind of hit and miss? Because again, the person I deal with that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Like a lot of things, she's right on point.
Yeah, it varies so much from person to person. I mean, it can be, a few years, it can be many years. So it really varies a lot.
Okay. What about prevention or any ways, are we treating it with medicine or what's going on in the world of medicine with Alzheimer's?
So at this point, we can't say for certain that we can really prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. We know that there are things that people can do to reduce their risk of cognitive decline, and that usually occurs prior to a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. So certainly we encourage people to, adopt those healthy lifestyle factors. And we like to say, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So certainly having a healthy diet, exercise, don't smoke. If you do smoke, try and quit. But then there are other activities. So, being socially engaged is really important for the brain. Really, challenging yourself. And I actually, grew up hearing about, she's done a crossword puzzle every day, and that's why, she's, still so with it, and that type of thing. So definitely challenging your mind is really important, and then getting enough sleep.
Okay. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk more about being socially engaged, especially at a time when most of us, due to COVID-19 and the pandemic, are disengaged. And then more about prevention and benefits of early diagnosis.
Right.
Okay? When we come back.
Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Why don't you ever see elephants hiding in trees? Because they're really good at it. Yeah, I get it.
And we're back here on Inside Indy talking about Alzheimer's, dementia, and more with Laura Forbes, who is the Communications Director for the Alzheimer's Association Greater Indiana chapter. And you were speaking of treatment for Alzheimer's.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are no treatments that can slow or stop the progression of the disease at this point. However, there are treatments that can help alleviate some of the symptoms for a time. So, it's really beneficial for people to get an early diagnosis, and then that way those treatments are much more effective.
But that almost sounds like the same thing.
Yeah, no, it's not quite.
If you're helping the symptoms.
Right.
But so how does it help with symptoms?
So some of the symptoms, it may help with, the symptoms of memory loss, but it's not stopping the progression of the disease in the brain.
That's interesting, because you would think one would do the other, but it can help them remember things, the short-term memory?
For a period of time, in some cases, not always. Some other symptoms that, can be treated, sometimes people have like delusions and that type of thing. There are treatments for, various symptoms at the different stages. But again, nothing to slow the progression of the disease at this point. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's unfortunate, though.
It is.
I guess because all these years I've been hearing about it, and it's just so hard to believe there have been no major advancements. What gives?
I know, and we're working on that at the Alzheimer's Association, I will tell you that, and we are making strides, but it's just, the brain is certainly, very complex, but we are making strides, and we're working hard, to find those treatments.
I read a study, and I don't have it in front of me, saying that exercise, I don't know, because it speeds up everything that's going on, that may slow the progression. And I'm sure there are tons of articles that come out, but I read that recently saying there may be some indication that doing that, which helps everything. Overall.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
just like diet and all of those healthy choices. It certainly cannot hurt, and so we definitely recommend that. There are associations between cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's. So again, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So definitely any exercise you can get is helpful.
And I'm just going to play doctor here. The first thing that comes to my mind is sugar. And we know with, that's an issue in terms of becoming a diabetic. And oftentimes they talk about that your cells become sticky. And when you mention plaque, it's just like almost for any disease, eliminating, cutting back on sugar. They say with cancer, the cancer cells love sugar. And so it's something to avoid. So I don't know, in my mind, it would be like exercise and don't eat sugar.
Yeah, that certainly.
Except for your birthday or something.
The occasional treat, but certainly, that sugar, diabetes, as you mentioned, is one of those diseases that is correlated, with Alzheimer's. Not that
really?
it's necessarily, a cause, but certainly a lot of people with diabetes will develop dementia. So, maintaining that healthy diet. We talk a lot about the Mediterranean diet, which is a lot of fruits and veggies, whole grains, lean proteins.
What we should be doing anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
The impact of COVID-19 on people with dementia and the caregivers.
Yes.
You say what?
So it has been very difficult on both the people with the disease and the caregivers. So every year we release a facts and figures report. Ours for this year just came out in March, and we found that deaths attributed to Alzheimer's disease increased 14% here in Indiana last year compared to the average of the previous 5 years, and 16% nationwide. Wow. Yeah, it's a significant uptick. Now, we do believe that some of those deaths, especially early in the pandemic when testing was not widespread, may have actually been COVID itself, but it was attributed to the Alzheimer's or dementia that the person had. So we need to look into that more, and we are looking into that more. But we also believe that later on in the pandemic that many of those deaths may have actually been a result of the challenges related to the pandemic, and specifically that social isolation. I talked about that social engagement is so important for the brain, and so people did not, have as much interaction, whether, being cared for at home or, in a long-term care community. They, didn't have as many family around. Of course, a lot of people with Alzheimer's and dementia have comorbidities that make them very vulnerable to a pandemic. So that really had an impact, we believe, on the people with the disease. And then with the caregivers, they did not have as much, support with, not having family come in to help them. Respite care facilities were shut down. And so it has been so difficult, for them. And we've been there every step of the way. We, of course, had to change how we do things, just like everybody else did. But we have, been there to support people.
All right. Speaking of caregivers, and unless you've been through it, people really don't know what that's like when you're taking care of someone who has Alzheimer's. So can you take us on that journey a little bit, what they go through and why they need that break?
So, it depends on the stage. Early on, we like to refer to care partners because, as you mentioned early, people don't need that kind of, 24/7 care necessarily. So if you get an early diagnosis, then the care partners are really involved in making plans for the future, putting legal and financial plans in place. That's something that we help with at the association. And then, as the disease progresses, then they have to provide, of course, more, hands-on care, for just, everyday needs. And so it's really, really challenging when you don't have those, care options available.
Right. All right. Wow. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I think the caregivers that I have talked to talk about the repetition when that person, especially when it's progressing, they repeat a lot of things, and it just kind of really, I don't know how to say, really gets to
Wears
them.
you down, kind
Wears
of.
you down,
Yeah. I think too, when new symptoms appear that indicate, that the disease is progressing, and sometimes it's something new that's, they don't know how to deal with. That's where that helpline that I mentioned before, 800-272-3900 is so helpful. And then we also have caregiver support groups that can really help people to, share information and just know that they're not alone in their journey. That's something that we hear from people a lot, is just that knowing, there are others who have been here, and I attended a support group a while back where, someone was having a challenge kind of similar to what I talked about of, my husband keeps asking to go home and I can't make him understand that he is home. And another caregiver chimed in and said, you're not going to make him understand, so just meet him where he is. Tell him you're safe here. We'll go home tomorrow, and then just meet people where they are. So just that is so helpful to to the
So we're trying to make
caregivers
them
to be
like
there
us or
together.
something,
Yeah.
What should people do if they notice the signs and symptoms in a loved one? And does the loved one, this is a twofold question.
Yeah.
Does the loved one know when you tell them you're having memory issues? Do they really know what you're saying? Can you have it and know that you have it?
Oh, yes, certainly you could. Well, you can know that something, is going on even in the early, stages. You might be kind of noticing, changes in yourself, certainly. And I think that's one thing that's really beneficial when you approach a loved one. Ultimately what you want is for them to go to the doctor and see, what's going on. But that may not be, the first thing that you want to say to them. You may want to engage them in a conversation and say, hey, I've noticed this. Have you been noticing that? Has that, been bothering you? Really have a dialogue, and then, ultimately, try to get them to go to the doctor, offer to go with them if that's a possibility. That can be really comforting. And also it's important to note, sometimes when you have these signs and symptoms, it could be Alzheimer's or dementia, or it might be something as simple as a vitamin deficiency that can be treated. So let them know, we're just going to find out what's going on. And if it is Alzheimer's or dementia, it is beneficial to be diagnosed, even though there are not treatments to slow the progression.
Wow, okay. Because I've noticed sometimes some resistance to, like, almost offended.
Yeah.
Like, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
run into that a lot in terms of, there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah, well, it can be really scary to face. So it's understandable, and that's where I think that approach is really really important. And we have advice actually on our website, alz.org/Indiana, for how people can go about that conversation.
Okay, and that information we've got that on the screen for you folks. So if you have any questions, go there. And again, that phone number is on the screen as well. If you need help, if you have questions, unbelievable the help that you can get on the other end of the line. I was so impressed. Fundraising, because it takes money to do research, it takes money to help in this fight against Alzheimer's. So what you got going on? Some stuff coming up?
Absolutely. So during the month of June, we have what's called the longest day. It culminates on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year.
Okay.
That's a do-it-yourself fundraiser that people can take any activity and turn it into a fundraiser. We find that people often will do a fundraiser honoring the person that they love who has the disease or has passed from the disease. So if it's that favorite cookie recipe, you might have a bake sale with the cookies or whatever the case may be. So it's just a great way for people to, honor their loved ones. And then in the fall, we have the Walk to End Alzheimer's.
Okay.
That, of course, had to change a lot last year, but we are planning to be in person again this year. So more to come, but you can always find that information on the website as well.
Okay, well, we appreciate you coming in and enlightening us. Laura Forbes, Communications Director for Alzheimer's Association Greater Indiana Chapter. Thanks for joining us on Inside Indy.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us. Again, the information is on the screen. If you or someone you know is going through this, there's help. And that's what we're here for, to help out. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly Vaughn. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
When I was growing up, my mom was extremely tidy. We were trained to put things back where we got them from. One day, when I walked into my mom's house, I felt like I walked to someone else's house. There was stuff everywhere. And just growing up the way I grew up, and to see this transition was very alarming.
When Sean talked to me, it was a wake-up call, and that's when I went to the doctor.
Bye, Janet. It's nice seeing you again. You're a good girl. Just let me know what I can do to help.
Well, to help me, she'd have to help every day. Every hour, every ouch, every time my wife calls for help. I mean, maybe she could help me make her lunch. But the crust, all the crust has to be cut off the corners. She could help me run to the doctor for the 5th time this week. Help me with the specialist and the second opinions and the painful paperwork about paperwork. Help me deal with how hard it is seeing my wife's name on so much paperwork. But this is on me. I'm the only one who can do this, like this, for her. Besides,
take care.
We will. Janet doesn't like her cooking anyway.
Find support for your strength. Visit aarp.org/caregiving for care guides and community.
Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.